I was a young man growing up in the bucolic seaside village of Bridgeport, Connecticut. It's great to have you here. Have you searched them for weapons? Much of my winter indoor time was spent reading books. Now, books then were made of paper and didn't require batteries or a wall socket. The words were just right there, like they were waiting for you. My first favorite author was James Fenimore Cooper, the writer of The Deerslayer, Hawkeye, Last of the Mohegans. The protagonist was Natty Bumppo. That's the part played by Daniel Day-Lewis in The Last of the Mohegans. Because of his woodland prowess and survival skills, the locals, Chingachgook especially, gave him the names of Deerslayer and Hawkeye. But the town folk knew him as Nathaniel Bumppo, Natty for short, and in retrospect, I suppose I fashioned my life using him as a template. What fascinated me most about that character is that he would set off into the deep green forests without any idea of a destination. He seemed more excited and interested in the journey through the wilderness than the actual getting there, wherever that was. No cell phone, no debit card, just gunpowder shot and hardtack enough to last until he could find something to eat. But he did have a moral compass. He knew the difference between right and wrong. He listened closely to the natives that had been in this great wilderness for centuries and learned from them the ways of survival. They in turn respected him for his willingness to listen and understand the meaning of a cracked twig or a forest gone suddenly silent. Every day was an education, and he was an eager and willing student. So after my 4 years of university, with a degree in English, I set off with some tools and traveled New England, trading the skills I had picked up working summers as a deckhand on an oyster boat and as a carpenter building houses in the southern Connecticut area. Well, I thought I was a carpenter until I walked up to a building site a few years before and asked the boss if he needed another house framer. He looked down at this 18-year-old kid and said, with a thick brogue, "So you think you're a carpenter, do you?" Sure, I said. "Well, we'll see," he said. And he pointed to a huge pile of joists, 2 by 12 inches, 12 feet long, each and every one. "Move those beams over there," he said, pointing to a spot about 200 feet away across a snow and ice-covered field. I needed the work, so I moved them. It took me 5 days, but I moved each and every single one of them. Monday morning, the boss scratched his chin and said, "You know, I think they were better over there." So I moved them back. Like I said, I needed the job. 5 days later, I was standing taller and stronger than I'd ever been before, and the boss handed me a framing hammer, and he says, "All right, carpenter, show me." Up until that moment, I thought I knew how to hold a hammer, but apparently I didn't. He showed me where to place my thumb and how to swing the hammer efficiently and drive in a nail with only 3 blows. I've been grateful ever since. The first job he set me to doing was nailing plywood flooring to the very same 2 by 12s I'd become so friendly with the first weeks of the job. All summer long, I pounded nails, climbed scaffolding, and did the fetch and carry demanded by the gruff crew who didn't take kindly to this new kid on the job. A few weeks later, on a fairly windy day, I was given the job to stand on the roof joists 4 stories up and lift 4 by 8 foot sheets of plywood passed from man to man up the scaffolding from the ground below. Now, I don't know how many of you have balanced yourselves standing spread-legged on narrow beams, holding a succession of what became a wooden sail whenever the wind blew. It's scary. And you learn very quickly to angle the edge of the plywood into the wind, otherwise you become Mary Poppins with a tool belt. I only tell you this because that day became one of the greatest in my life. When I was holding the last sheet of plywood, I looked down to where I had been handing them to the guy in the room below. He wasn't there. I couldn't drop the plywood, fearing it would cause havoc and mayhem on the street below. I was in a pickle for sure. Then I heard the sounds of rapid hammering and laughter as two of the carpenters nailed the edges of my boots to the rafters I was standing on. Just to be clear, I was wearing the boots at the time. Then they doubled and triple knotted my laces as I struggled to keep my balance and hold onto the plywood that was hinting at becoming a kite. So after nailing me to the rafters, the crew left for lunch laughing hysterically. It took me a while to maneuver the large sheet of plywood to a place where I could tack it flat with a couple of nails. Then I cut off my laces and lowered myself to the floor below because they had also taken the ladder I used to climb up there. It took a long time to pry my boots loose and find some twine to replace the laces enough to wear them again. When the crew, when they returned, they gave me a lunch that they had bought for me and sat around joking as I ate. I realized then that I had been accepted as one of them. I knew instinctively that it had been necessary for them to test my mettle, to put me through ugly, back-breaking, mud-crusted tacks to see what I was made of. On that day, the lunch they gave me and the laughter that came with it was as special and grand as any Oscar or Emmy I could hope to place on my mantle.